Hello and welcome to HR with me, Leon Morley, founder of HR Recruitment Solutions. In this show, we're going to be discussing what makes a great business leader. We're currently live across LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and you can get your comments and questions over to us via those platforms in the chat. And we'd certainly like to hear your views. So we'll go straight in because it's a huge topic that we've got to discuss today. So we'll start with introductions. So Peter, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi there, Leon. So my name's Peter Anderton. I'm a poacher turned gamekeeper. I used to be, for many years, I've been an engineer, but I crossed over to the dark side about 20 odd years ago and joined HR. And I've been involved in a whole range of different roles ever since that have brought me closer and closer to leadership, strategy, change. And I take the essence of engineering and apply it to simplifying what leadership is all about. So that's really what makes me tick. And I work with senior leaders in organizations who need their teams to go further and they need them to go faster.
Lovely. Thank you, Peter. Ilona, can you go next, please?
Sure. So, my name is Ilona Brannen and I am a coach and consultant. I work primarily with scale-ups, helping them to scale their people, processes and systems. And I have a podcast that's all about exploring leadership for the digital age, because I feel like the digital age has made it more complex. So that's a little bit about me.
Fab. And the podcast is obviously on pretty much all the platforms, isn't it, from what I've seen? So very easy to find. And I'm sure, obviously, with the links to this show, they'll be able to find that very easily through your profiles too. So definitely go check it out. Julia.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Julia Milner. I work as a professor in leadership at EDHEC Business School. That's in Nice. So I'm based right now in beautiful Nice, although it's quite dark already outside. And I also work as a management consultant. So I work with organizations, helping them with their leadership approach and creating an organizational culture that flourishes.
Thank you. So there we go. There's the introductions on a sort of professional level. For those that watch our shows regularly, they'll know that we play always a little game where we do 2 lies and 1 truth. And this is a game where we each tell 3 facts about ourselves. When I say facts, 2 are actually lies and 1 is in fact the truth. So we're going to go round the panel. I'm not going to do one this time round because I do them every single time and people are really bored. And I'm running out of ideas of lies that I can make up that seem legitimate. So I'm not going to do it. So we may as well go in the same order. Peter, please tell us your 3 facts.
Okay, so my 3 facts are: I've conducted 4 weddings and a funeral. I'm an award-winning artist at a national level. And also, I've got a real thing for cucumber. I will find a way to eat cucumber in some form every day.
The sandwiches. That's the easiest way.
Any form whatsoever.
Salad and sandwiches. Okay, fantastic. So we'll obviously reveal these at the end of the show. Ilona, what are your 3 facts?
So mine is about people I've met. So I've met Fidel Castro, I've met the Pope, and I've met David Attenborough.
Right, okay. That's quite a lineup, I have to say. Obviously not all at the same time, even if it were true. Okay, fantastic. So Julia, I think when we spoke off air, you were sort of thinking about which have you got some prepared? Have you decided on your 3 facts?
Yes,
cool.
But I'm so bad at lying.
We won't even need to go at the end. We'll just know.
It's gonna be so obvious, but anyways, okay, I try. So number 1 is I have a rescue swimmer, a lifeguard license, and I love fish. So I love going in the ocean, and so it was quite handy that I had that, especially for like going on class trips, and so I did it quite young. And my number 2 is that I interviewed the Backstreet Boys. So for those who still maybe know them, quite a while ago. I think they're coming back again. They're trending again. But when they were on their high, I interviewed them in in New York for German.
These are elaborate facts, I have to say, Julie.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for a German musician channel, so like the German MTV back then. And my number 3 is that I worked as a writer for a daily soap called Forbidden Love. So it was all about love stories, and I was one of the I was with the storyliners, and created lots of drama and love and excitement, hopefully.
Fascinating.
So these are the 3.
I think yours are really good. You sort of started. I was going to sort of suggest that you might can play poker, but these were they were quite elaborate. There was quite a bit of detail there, which makes it quite difficult to figure out.
I think you might be a better liar than you thought you were.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too. Right. So I just want to nod to something that we do, which is called HR Book Club. So this is a weekly interview that we do with authors for the very best HR books, and you can get those short interviews via our LinkedIn company page. So if you like this sort of stuff on hosting HR, then certainly do check out our company LinkedIn page, and you'll see some interesting interviews with authors, why they wrote the books, what the book's about. So you can decide if you'd like to buy them or not, I suppose. So I just wanted to make a nod to that. Right, let's move on. So obviously a huge topic this. And as a reminder to all of those in the chat, that please do get any comments, any questions you'd like to get across over to us. But we're actually going to start with another game. And this is a brand new game solely for this show. And we're going to discuss some specific leaders and work out, we're going to try and do it really quick and get a consensus about whether these are really great business leaders. Okay, so are we all ready for the first one to come up? Yeah? Fab. Right, we're going to start with this one. So we've got Richard Branson. Is he a great business leader? True or false? What are we thinking?
I'm going to start by saying I don't think so, because I feel that he wasn't very great to his employees during the pandemic. So they, had their reduction, their pay, and I think he didn't even bring some back from furlough, or there was something strange there. And also, I just wonder, would he have been so successful if he started now? I feel like there was a lot of benefits from starting when he did, from the pace that he did. So. Okay,
interesting. Anything to add from you two? Do you agree with it? Because he's generally held up as quite a philanthropic, kind of charitable. I thought generally we'd have a consensus of he's a good guy and a great business leader. But what are your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I would go also. He's a good guy. But I mean, what Ilona just said is of course, leadership is, I think, changing. But I think there are a couple of things I really like about him. I like that at least he appears that he's really interested in people, in terms of like trying to get to know people, and so the employees, and really getting their input, and that he's not like standing there and saying this has all been me, but that he's very aware that success comes from the people that work for you, and and he gives the impression that he gives them lots of he empowers them and lets them be creative. So, but I have to say, Ilona, you just.
I'm going to go for true. I didn't follow exactly how he managed things from a COVID perspective particularly closely, so I can't say. But again, in some contexts, a 20% pay cut is a good thing. So it all depends on what's happening and what's going on. But I'm going to say true, because of his focus on people and because of his focus on results, and to some extent his approach to making mistakes as well, which I think I can understand runs throughout the whole organization.
Okay, good. Well, this game is a little bit of a warm-up. Obviously, we've got further questions which we'll delve into a bit deeper. So, it's good to get your kind of take on it. And that was news to me as well. I thought there would be a general consensus. I thought it would be an easier one. Less so for the next one. Jeff Bezos. I think he's now the richest man in the world, I believe. And obviously his company... has great things. It's done great things for consumers and a lot of things there, but obviously come under quite a lot of criticism in other ways. So what's our thoughts? Is Jeff Bezos a great business leader? Anyone want to give their thoughts?
It depends who you're asking, really, doesn't it?
Okay. So it depends. Okay. Ilona, any thoughts?
I'm going to kind of go back to kind of a similar point of view about the Richard Branson thing. I think the fact that he wasn't even aware when he said thank you to all of the Amazon staff and all of the Amazon customers who have just paid for me to go into space, he didn't realize how that might not go down so well. Just kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies, if I'm honest. And to also have that much control and power in one person is actually alarming. And I don't think enough is being done to kind of really think about the risks that that entails. So like one fact about Amazon that blew my mind was apparently the American army and the American military cannot do anything without asking for Amazon's permission because they have a lot of the supply chain.
All right.
Like,
wow. That is I didn't know that. Yeah. It's wow, that's quite a development.
Yeah,
Julia, what's oh sorry, Ilona.
No, carry on, please.
Julia, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we have these leaders who obviously achieve amazing things in terms of the companies they build and the successes they have. And I mean, you can't say anything about that. But yeah, sometimes the question is how you get there. But I have to say with Jeff Bezos, here you get one truth about me, which I usually don't share. But, besides of reading lots of academic articles and everything, I love gossip magazines. So I have to say with him, my opinion is kind of like overshadowed about what happened in his private life. So I'm a bit biased here at the moment. So
yeah, I don't think we should judge any of these by their private lives. I think just in terms of their professional side, and there's certainly one I think from a private life perspective that probably could be judged a bit more. I'm going to move on to the next one. Who's
Actually,
again?
Just very quickly, Leon, just to say, I was being a little slightly facetious when I say it depends who you're asking. I don't believe he's a great business leader, but like Julia said, you can't deny what he's achieved.
Yeah.
And it's a bit easy for us to sit on the sidelines and say, oh, well, you're not very good, are you? When actually we're in a very different situation. So I think we need to be a little bit careful.
Yeah, I mean, none of us know these people who have worked in their organizations or anything like that. So it is purely a little bit of conjecture. And it's just a little bit of just food for thought, really, as we go through those further sort of questions. So we'll move on to the next one. Jack Welch. Now, obviously, hailed as one of the greatest CEOs for such a long time. And I think there's been a bit of a revisionist sort of argument, seeing how GE has suffered really since he left, and some of the things that he said some slightly outrageous things, hasn't he? But yeah, what's your thoughts? Is Jack Welch a great business leader?
Okay, so I didn't actually know who that was when it came up. I actually thought it was Arnie, and I was like, he looks odd. Like I said, he's on holiday, so he's giving me kind of Dracula vibes. So I wouldn't really know.
Okay. Peter, Julia, do you know Jack Welch?
So I think one of the biggest factors in terms of leadership ability is what happens after you're not there.
Yeah.
And I think you can't escape that situation. Now, you could argue, was it just a bad decision on successor, or was it more endemic than that? He'd actually worked very hard to try and create leaders and to empower people. So there are a lot of things that he did that we would really be supportive of, but something happened.
Yeah.
And I don't know what.
Well, the strategy I think that he had was, I think kind of, they didn't really consolidate into one area, so I don't think that really helps. It didn't really add to what they were doing. So I think strategically, some people had some issues with that. But the share price when he was there, the company was doing fantastically well. But then he said some strange things really afterwards. But I think that the thing with him is he's probably the biggest performance driver CEO and business leader that probably you come across there. We talked in the last show a lot about force ranking and things like some of the business practices that are, very have come from him and his ideas and the things that he very much championed during his career, really. So that's why I thought I'd put him in there, because it's hard to really know. Julia, do you know much about him? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I think during his time, probably his leadership style worked. I don't know if it would work necessarily today, especially with all the changes that Ilona already mentioned with digital and everything. I think though, like Peter said, I think he did a lot for the leadership development. He at least tried.
Yeah.
So I think he created a whole like internal university. What was
Yeah,
it
he
called?
did. Yeah.
Or something like this. So he did a lot there. And if I'm not mistaken, I read something about him where he also tried to hire people not based on, are they coming from an Ivy League or have this degree, but also giving people a chance who just showed that they're really willing to do things. So I like this kind of like not being so this elite focus and really having a broader perspective, because we have diverse backgrounds and you don't know the story of someone. So if you just put them prematurely into boxes. So I think there are a few things that I know when I read about him or did some case studies that I really liked. But again, I don't know if this leadership style would work nowadays, because it's very centered, as Peter said, onto him.
Well, there's a question there coming up, I think, about whether what's a good leader today is different from the past. So we'll definitely go into that and say this is a bit of a warm up really for us all. So I'll move on to the next one. So we have Elon Musk. Very, very interesting, I think, character. So what's people's thoughts about him? Is he a great business leader? Anyone want to go?
And he's great. Sorry, go after you, Julia.
Oh, okay. Well, I think he has great vision, and he's a great, how can I say this, individual fighter. so he's, he has this ability to think about things or dream about things that, where a lot of other people would just stop or not even imagine that you were able to go there. But I think he's also shown to be relentless towards himself when it comes to work. And I think that also, does go on to the people you work with. So in terms of like maybe sometimes being a micromanager. So I think, he has shown that he's very hands-on. So he says, things like you can't be too, how do you say this? I don't even know the English word, but in German, it's you're not too schade. So you are not too schade. You don't feel like you can't do something because you're the leader. You get your hands dirty, kind of like this way. But at the same time, if you do everything, then you're micromanaging, and then it's getting a little tricky. But again, what he has dreamed and taken people with him, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. And I think I'd agree wholeheartedly. What he's achieved is phenomenal, and none of us here can take anything away from that. I think he's described himself not just as a micromanager, but a nano manager, I believe was one of the terms that he used. So in terms of being a role model on how to lead, when you look at the broader perspective of what leadership is about, I would say there's some gaps. But in terms of what Julia says about visionary and making things happen, phenomenal.
Yeah, that was definitely the first thing that came up for me, was definitely if you want someone who's going to reach for the space, like literally, he's done amazing things to push people that far. I guess the other part of me is also going, but he has pushed a lot of people very far, and he's also pushing himself quite far. So even just reflecting on this conversation, I'm like, how much more energy does he have left to operate at that level? So how will his leadership have to change as he ages, right? And he won't be able to nano manage. It's a possibility now, but in 10 years' time, he'll have to pivot and think, how can he empower the leaders of these organizations to drive that vision?
Yeah, interesting. So you may have noticed that there's been a number of men so far, and I have to be honest, because when I was looking at
what's the question I asked you?
Yeah. No, it's slightly, and this is where I'm. So when I was thinking about this, it was quite hard for me, and I'll be completely honest, to think of famous kind of leaders that we could all kind of easily all kind of know a little bit about, and we might have seen some scandal or know a little bit about what they've been doing. So, but Safra Catz, CEO of Oracle. So, do we know very much about Safra in the panel?
I don't. which
No,
is
no, Julia. Okay, and this is the thing, right? So there are some CEOs of really large companies. So YouTube, I think you mentioned Ilona Bumble. I think of
Yes,
there
there
are.
are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there are some really large, very impactful organizations that made a huge difference to
Yeah.
consumers and people all over the world. They don't necessarily seem to get a lot of the same sort of, I don't know, scrutiny or interest for whatever reason. Obviously there are less of them, and we can go into some of the reasons why, and it is something we do really want to discuss throughout this discussion point as well. So but that really kind of sums up the end of the little game. So that's our little warm up, and there's a few themes that have come up there about how people lead and things like that. So I suppose the reason I wanted to start with that is my first question really is, how do we really define what a great business leader is? Because all of them have been successful, but not everybody thinks that they're wonderful leaders. So how do we define a great business leader? So who would like to go first on that question? I'd like to get an answer from all of you on this one, if that's okay. Somebody volunteer.
Well, I'm going to go for it, and because obviously there's, in terms of leadership, there's the result that you deliver, and there's how you go about it. Julia was referring on that, linking to that earlier on, and I think it's looking at the whole picture of who gets to say whether somebody's a great leader or not. And the first thing, obviously, we need to look at is what have they achieved. And the people we've talked about here have achieved some phenomenal things. And I think that's got to be a factor. So you've got the shareholders, for example, will have a view on this. And they have a role to play in terms of whether they assess somebody to be a great leader. But at the same time, you've got to parallel it with the whole employee experience. Because it has to come down to whether something's sustainable in the long run. And I guess there's a degree of integrity and ethics that comes with this as well, and the results that you can deliver, because you can drive things the wrong way in a particular direction for a period of time, but you can't do it forever. The experience of your customers will never for long exceed the experience of your staff. So I think the answer is it's a whole range of factors. And on one level, we could say, well, is it the shareholders that decide? Is it the people in the organization that decide? I think fundamentally it comes down to those two things. But when we get into the age-old debate of is there, what's the difference between a manager and a leader, and we can go around in circles in that, and what does that look like? Fundamentally, the difference with a leader is it's somebody you follow because you want to. And I think that's the big difference here, which only the employees in the organization can answer. Interesting.
Ilona?
I'm going to say a great leader is someone who definitely achieves results, but with care for growing people along the way. And I also was sort of reflecting on what you were saying, Peter, about shareholders. And shareholders as a concept, I think, came in the 80s. So it just shows you how that particular sort of like emphasis on shareholder like value and shareholders being happy influenced then how we behaved in businesses to then work to that ambition. And actually, if you thought about new business models or, particularly like thinking just about the circular economy, potentially that could be a driver in the future of how circular is your business, how much does it contribute to making things more equal? Because whatever you measure gets monitored, and that's how we are influenced in our behaviours. So I think it's almost like it's delayed sometimes, like what we could achieve and what's actually happening right now.
Nicely put.
Thank you, Julia.
Well, I don't know. Do you want to have the research answer?
Yeah, that's exactly. Let's have the research answer.
So I guess it's interesting what Peter said, because it depends, I guess, if you ask, there's studies out there where they ask, successful leaders of different companies what they think makes a great leader. And interesting, they said things such as, being ethical, empowering others, and those kind of things. And I think being ethical, I find very interesting in these current times that the leaders see that for themselves. And then there are, of course, the other studies that ask the employees what they think makes a great leader. I personally, I like one study, which is very practical, that has been done with Google, and they looked into what are the traits, not traits, but what do great leaders that employees say, hey, my manager is really great. What are they doing? And it's all around empowering others, coaching them, listening, asking questions. So it's basically helping others to do their job in the best way, putting them into positions where they can leverage their strength, where they can work with values, where there is some meaning to the job. And I think that's quite a lot. That's a big task for any leader to do. And I think it always sounds so simple, but actually doing this in practical, manageable steps is not that easy. So yeah.
And what's interesting, Julia, is those attributes that you're mentioning, like in a recent study I saw with the World Economic Forum, they're saying that that's predominantly female traits. They're traditionally seen as those feminine qualities that are now becoming so, like we've just into her, this relational idea of leadership to raise everybody else up. And I think that's a really interesting pivot that's happened over the course of the pandemic.
And this is so just going on to the with Safra Katz, one of the things that, from what the research that I've done on her, she seems very much like that, very kind of human focused. A lot of things you talked about, Julia, there in terms of the research, that's how she comes across. I don't know what's like. I've never worked for Oracle. I have no idea. But there's 140,000 people that do, and they're a very successful business. But she seems to say a lot of the right things and doesn't have some of the, I suppose, sort of, I don't know, hiccups in terms of personality traits that maybe some of the other successful male leaders might bring. Which is an interesting side, and it does kind of bring me on quite nicely onto the next question, which is about sort of characteristics of a good leader, and what sort of skill sets do they bring? So, okay, we need to empower people and things, but what is that as a skill set? So, Peter, would you like to go first again?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because there's a lot of people that have tried to package up, well, if you do this, and this, then you've nailed leadership. And I think we need to get our heads around the fact there's no such thing as the perfect leader. And if we look for like the cookie cutter approach, we're going to cause ourselves a problem. We're going to end up with very average leaders, and different people will excel in different ways. So I think when it comes to the skill set of a leader, the answer is yes. There'll be different things for different people that will apply in different contexts. So you can say, for example, Elon Musk, wow, utterly visionary, but there's a lot more to leadership than that. So falling down in some areas, great in others. I would actually argue that the fundamental thing that really, the foundation, if you like, that sets up a great leader is somebody who does it without ego. I would argue that rule number one of leadership is it's not about you. And I think when you get that as a starting point, then you've got the right foundation for being a good leader. It's not all about your ideas. It's not all about your solution. It's not all about your way of doing things. And it's certainly not about your ego. When you get that clear, then actually you've set the right foundation for being a good leader. There's other things that would follow, but I would say that's exactly where it starts.
So out of those four leaders, which one operates without an ego?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question.
The four male leaders in there. Yeah, I think it's interesting. We just had a comment as well on, I'll bring it up on screen. So Vanessa, hi Vanessa, I know she watches quite a few of our shows and enjoys them. So currently reading the bio for Elon Musk. Disappointed about some of the behavior and part of his personality, but it's impressive what he's achieved. And I think, certainly when you look at a lot of those, they definitely have that. And this was kind of something that was brought up in our previous show as well. We had Helena Bosky, and I'll come back to that in a little bit because I want to talk to you a little bit about that. But Julia, did you have anything that you wanted to add in terms of what characteristics you feel make a good leader from the research perspective?
Yeah. I'm actually very hopeful for leaders. I'm very hopeful that you can learn the skills. So I've done a study which has been published with Harvard Business Review, and what we did, we looked exactly at this empowering leadership style. So we looked at leaders who use actually coaching skills, which go exactly in this way, like, listening, questioning, giving feedback, and so on. And I would say the key, well, there are lots of key takeaways, but one is, I think you're gonna achieve if you have the capability to self-reflect. So when we first, sorry, I can give you a little bit of a very short version of the study. So we put managers together, and we let them, we just gave them the instruction, please coach the other person in a 5-minute conversation. And without any further explanation what to do, just, because that's actually the reality in a lot of organizations that, oh, I heard coaching is great. Can you please start coaching your team a bit more? And then, leaders go and do that. So anyway, so they had these conversations, and we videotape them, and we let them evaluate them by themselves, by other peers, by colleagues, and then also by coaching experts, so people who have been working for a long time in the field and have been, trained many years in coaching. And interesting enough, so when the peers, so the colleague watched the video the first time around, they said, oh, this looks great, this is good coaching, wonderful. And so when the experts looked at it, they were like, well, maybe not so much. Then we put the leaders through a training workshop. So we actually showed them the skills, we explained it, and they practiced a lot, they got feedback and so on. And then we let them redo the conversation with another person, and so they engaged, and they saw, they were, improving in a very short amount of time and a lot of skills. But the most interesting fact I found was we let them also re-evaluate the first video. So now that they had the knowledge and then they had some skills in how to do it, they watched the videos again, and they were able to say, okay, actually, now that I'm seeing this, I can say that what my colleague did was not really that great. They were, what they often did was motivational micromanaging. So they went in and they said, yeah, why don't you try and do this? And why don't you go and do this? So they were very, with a lot of oomph, but they were still trying to solve the issue for the other person. Whereas if you go in with a coaching approach, you really let them arrive at their own solution, and let them implement it. So for me, the biggest takeaway, besides that I'm very happy that leaders can learn the skills, so there's really hope. I mean, it's easier for some than for others, was that they are also able to self-reflect and to say, okay, hold on, I can see, what I was doing was not right. And I think if you have that ability to do that, then you can do and achieve amazing things, because it's not about getting it right the first time. It's about looking at it, learning from your mistakes, and then trying again. So you don't have to be perfect to be a leader. You just have to be willing to learn.
Interesting.
I love that. And also, I think to add to that, this is why I get so excited about leadership for the digital age, because you just said you recorded it, then they could watch it back, right? So one of the things I'm often playing around with in my mind is, we all want people to self-reflect and become really self-aware. And actually, one of the best tools that you could do is video yourself. It's the ultimate cringe thing where you have to watch it, but then you start to actually see and refine. And actually, maybe, if you had snippets during the day where you actually had video of you reflecting. I'm not saying video for everyone, but I just think there's so many interesting digital tools and ways to develop people. And I think that the thing all the leaders we discussed, whether you like them or not, they all are exceptional learners. And I don't think that's changing. I think you have to be an extraordinary learner to be a great leader, because then you're learning all the time. You might not be learning the right things, but they definitely are learning. And I feel like there's a huge opportunity with digital tools and technology to almost accelerate that self-reflection and to really think about, how to get that self-awareness with people.
That's really interesting. Do you think, because there's actually a very similar theme in the things that each of you said there, do you think then, from what you're saying, Ilona, that you think that's changed from, say, Jack Welch's era and 20, 30, 40 years ago? Do you think that this sort of what we consider to be a great business leader now is different to what it was prior to the digital age?
Well, I think you can have amazing business leaders in different ways, firstly. So, I would argue Cardi B is an amazing business leader, because she makes money not just through her records, but through content and building a fan base and using OnlyFans to monetize her backstage content and all this sort of stuff. and other sort of entrepreneurs that are using digital tools and technology to just almost leverage things like that. And I think because in Jack Welch's day, or like with leaders of massive organizations, and I used to work in one too, it's generally like the top sort of levels that receive this leadership development training or coaching or that extra support to help them drive the growth in the business. But actually with these tools and with what we have available to us, we can all accelerate that development. So we can all become better at our own sort of situational awareness and self-awareness. And I think that's really interesting. I mean, we haven't even started to explore digital communication yet, but like these are things I think that are having a shift, because it's not just about physically being in the same room. It's about how can you transmit yourself as a leader in a virtual world. And I actually think, Elon Musk does a great job of that, because his PR machine is constant. So you know what's going on, and at least you're all aware of him, and he's very, very well followed, and he's constantly twittering. So it's interesting, these different nuances, I think, that are a bit more complicated. Whereas, not that long ago, but it's like it was just the newspaper. That's how you found out about your leaders. Now you can check now and just see what's the latest tweet.
Yeah, and I think obviously if you think about, sorry, Peter, just the former president of the free world, I mean, became president basically probably via Twitter as much as anything else, and was able to kind of have a lot of people follow his leadership into the biggest job arguably in the world. So yeah, it's definitely different. Sorry, Peter, you were going to say something.
Well, no, you beat me to it, to be honest, because and he's a classic example of somebody who didn't get rule number 1. And actually, he didn't get rule number 2 either, because he thought it was everybody else who needed to change and he didn't need to make any changes. And if you go back to what Julia was saying, I couldn't agree more. If you've got leaders who are able to self-reflect, and rather than thinking, well, this is how everybody else needs to change and this is how they all need to get their act together, actually, what do I need to do differently in order to get different results from other people? That is very much, you're getting to the real essence of leadership.
Interesting. I'm going to play a little clip from the last show, actually, because there's a lot of what we're talking about here is talking about empathy and self-reflection and all these sorts of things. So we had a show, What HR Gets Wrong, which we did last month. And if you haven't seen that show and you'd like to see it, then it's obviously available on all the platforms and also available on all your podcast platforms as well. So I'm going to play this short clip and I'm going to ask your thoughts on it.
As well, we do. I mean, psychopathy is one of the things I have researched with the checklist. So I know that there are some, people do need to be kept in check sometimes. Certain behaviours do need to be eradicated. But it's very difficult to. If that person sits at the top, it's very difficult to say to CEO, you're a psychopath, and sometimes they have to be a little bit psychopathic because they have to make tough decisions without, sometimes there has to be a bit of a disconnect. I don't know. I mean, there are so many arguments about.
There we go. So yeah, I mean, slightly different, a very different angle from the discussions that we've had. So. Julia, I'd be very interested because Helena is a neuroscientist and things. So from a research perspective of leadership, what's your response to what she said there?
Well, we do know that we have a high level of narcissists at the top leadership level. So absolutely, I mean, that is there's a very high risk, and sometimes, people get to the top not because they have great human skills and are looking after other people, but because of other traits that are valued. But I don't know, they're valued for such only for a certain time, I think, because at one point it all crashes around you, hopefully, because they can do a lot of harm to people. It it can lead to burnout. It can lead to all sorts of things. And I would like to add, though, because I think we really kind of like rushed through the whole female leadership, and I want to hear Ilona talk about this. But I do want to say that there are lots and lots and lots of great female leaders, also very famous. So I think just because we didn't know that one person, well, we know her, the name, but I didn't have lots of insights on that. I think, yeah, that's also important to say, because I think the portion of the male narcissist is higher than on the female side, but no matter what, it can go both ways. So.
I think there's going back to something that Helena did say in the show there, she did talk about the difference between the male and female brain, and to do a lot with a lot of the skills you talked about does actually lend itself a bit more to the way that the female brain is in her eyes, and that was also partly discussed. That it wasn't a show about leadership as such, but that did sort of come about a little bit as well. And yeah, I think you're right, Julia, from what I'm hearing, and I'm no expert, but that there's certainly part of that. What do you think, Peter and Ilona, in terms of what Helena was saying about psychopathy in leadership?
So I think, well, a point about difficult decisions makes a lot of sense. So I get that. I think it is possible, and some of this goes back a long way to some really old stuff like Jim Collins' Good to Great, which has got some really powerful principles and lessons from a leadership perspective, that it's possible to have an iron will about the organization succeeding and doing what is right for the organization, rather than it being all about you. So I don't think you have to be a sociopath or a psychopath. I think, as Julia said, often, the narcissists, those that have these approaches that it's all about them, confine themselves, sometimes rising to the top. I think you can make those hard decisions and focus on that, as long as you're focusing what is on what is right for the organization, what is right for the country. I mean, if you pick up on the idea of female leaders, obviously, Jacinda Ardern's been put out there as the case study for the approach to coronavirus. Now, again, nothing's perfect there, because you have to think, where were they up to on their vaccination program? That seems to have fallen really badly behind, and that's come up and bit them. However, the approach that she's taken there has been a very different one, and she's taken some really tough decisions very early on. She's taken expert advice. It's not been about her opinions or what people will think of her for what she's doing. She's trying to do what she thinks is the right thing. She's got that iron will for making things work for the country. And I think that's a difference there.
Okay, Ilona?
So, I definitely see that there's a lot of drive within a lot of leaders to get things done, because you do have to have that almost, your vision essentially is a projection of your vision. Like, your vision is a projection of what's going on inside, right? Because you're talking and thinking about that. You want to be recognized for something. And I think a lot of the time it starts off like that, because obviously I work with a lot of scale-ups and startups, and it comes from that person's idea, so they have to be totally bought in and invested in it. A tricky one on that one. The other thing I was thinking about with, the female male thing is, we've only really started to see women leaders act as women leaders, right? Not just replicate male behaviors. We're actually starting to see feminine behaviors in leadership. And when I was doing some research for this show, one of the things about leadership development books is the vast majority of them are written by men. Huge swathing chunk of men are writing about leadership development, because traditionally it was just men in leadership positions, and we're still trying to get more women in leadership. And I really think there's a massive opportunity for there to be more voices that are feminine and female, or even non-binary, or from different backgrounds completely, talking about leadership from a different lens, rather than it just being the same thing replicated again and again. And the leaders that we see at the moment are the consequences and the result of years before being influenced about what leadership was.
I agree. That's a really good point. And you can see that, and I think it will. Yeah, no, yeah, boom, done. Next show is on. No. I think that's a really good point. And when you think about the leaders now and what they've been influenced by and what's been influenced by the past, and the next show, just so people do know, is actually about diversity and inclusion. So some of this stuff will come up in that discussion. So stay tuned next month for that one. I'm just going to talk a little bit about, I suppose, leadership development I know this is something you all do. So what sort of strategies have you or would you recommend that businesses take to improve their leadership capability? Does anyone want to go first? Go on, Ilona.
Definitely. Because I think sometimes it's like, oh, I'll put them in a leadership role, or they're given a leadership role. Because especially like in the startup scale-up world, everything's going so fast. It's like, okay, you're leading that team now. But actually investing in putting something in place, something is always a great start. And having support from the C-suite, especially, is vital to actually then see that being integrated into the business, not just like an additional thing as like a nice to have. It should be an integral part of your talent pipeline and how you're going to build capability in your organization. I know, like Peter, in your talk, you spoke about how we're all leaders and we all contribute to leadership. I think that's even more so in a remote first digital world, because we all have to like contribute meaningfully. And it's not all in an office where there's just one person to look at and direct. We all have to kind of be in a bit of an ecosystem and a symbiotic relationship to make an organization move forward now.
Okay, Peter, Julia?
So in terms of what I would think they should do, I think one of the things we need to be careful of is we don't just do a leadership program.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of that's been going on, and that's perhaps a little bit old, but it's still very much around today. And the first question I talk about in this scenario is, well, why do you want to do it? What is it you're trying to achieve? And I think not just having measurables, but actually having a reason. So something that we need to achieve as an organization that we couldn't achieve right now. You know, that if our leadership capability was better, if we were able to get more out of our people, if we had more people who were at their best, well, actually, we're achieving this, but we could do this. And I mean a meaningful target, not just an increase in sales. That's just a lag measure that's not really telling you much from a broader leadership perspective. So I would say, in terms of doing something, don't just think we need to tick a box on leadership and do something. But be the first thing, there's lots of answers to your question, Leon, but the first thing is, for goodness sake, have a really important reason why. So you understand what is it you're trying to achieve. And actually from that flows quite a lot of useful information, because once you're really clear on what you're trying to achieve, you can get an understanding of the value of that for the organization. And that becomes a very, very clear, meaningful figure, so that rather than just ticking boxes on leadership development, you can actually do something a lot more meaningful, because you realize if we do this and we and our leaders are accountable for that, well, actually, instead of playing with what we were going to play with whatever figures we were thinking of, actually we realize we can be in a totally different game. So we're not just fluffing around the edges here, we're doing something really significant and meaningful that actually turns the dial and doesn't tick the box.
Just on that point, when you said about the why, what they're trying to achieve, what do people normally say to you that they want when they talk about leaders? So they come to you for advice about leadership development. What do they? And you say, okay, well, why do you want to do it? What's the outcome you're looking for? What do they typically say? Do they talk about things like empathy? What do they talk about? Or is it sales? We just want more sales? Or
so, bizarrely enough, and I'd be interested to know what Ilona and Julia find as well, that most often, if somebody comes to me in this regard and approaches me, usually the most common reason is that they feel it's the right thing to do. It's more of a feeling than it is, I want to achieve X, Y, or Z, or here's the outcome. And for those who will actually approach me directly on it, if I'm honest, the thinking's usually quite woolly about it. You know, in some regards, the situation's almost better the other way around, where there's other conversations that I'm having and we're talking through particular challenges. And what comes out from the challenge that they're dealing with is they recognize there is a leadership development component for the challenge they're trying to address. That's a lot more successful.
Okay, interesting. So Julia, we've not asked you in terms of what advice you would give, but also I'm quite interested in terms of, what people say they want from an outcome. From leadership development. So there's sort of two questions bolted onto each other there. What's your thoughts?
Well, I mean, often people are promoted based on their technical expertise. So they've been really, really good at the job they're doing. And so the next logical step is, hey, now you want to lead a team. but that really requires other skill set. So I guess you have the two sides. You have organizations who say, hey, we want to invest, and a lot of managers actually want to learn. So it's kind of like a goodie. And then you have the other side where something is going not so well. It's not so, you have a high turnover, people are complaining or not so happy. So then you have more like the painful approach. And then you go from there. I think though, what's important is kind of like a few things. So it's not going to help you if you just run a leadership program and then the leader comes back and then they try out these new things, and the team just sits there and goes like, oh gosh, not another one of these. Here we go again. I'm going to suffer through this for a couple of weeks and then he or she will have forgotten about it. So I think there is just, yeah, sure, and it's a nice couple of days for leaders, hopefully, if they have a good trainer. But the key thing is really to think about, well, how can you long-term integrate it, and how can you long-term create processes that actually help? Because it's not going to help you if, the leader, has all the efforts, but employees can't even, they're frustrated because, I don't know, the customer service line, they can't do anything, so it's not going to help them if the leader says, go, and yay. Nothing is there, so there's the frustration. So I guess you have to look into what are the roadblocks, can you get them out of the way? You have to role model from the top. It's not going to help you if you say, yay, we're all going to now use a leadership coaching approach, and on the top you're micromanaging. It's not going to help you. You also need to think about support for the leaders themselves, whether that's coming from peers, but really establishing something, or from HR. That's a very good thing. Yeah, if you have somebody there as a linkage. So I think it's a whole, I always say, the leadership program or training, and that should go hand in hand with the organizational culture. And I guess that leads to Peter's why, the questions of the why, and having that really linked and intertwined. So, yeah.
Fantastic. So Ilona, I know you do a lot of work with startups and smaller organizations and things. So I'm guessing they don't necessarily have like an L&D function or a leadership development specialist within the organization and things like that. So what kinds of things do you, and I know this is probably a huge topic in terms of everything you do, but like what's the kind of the sort of highlights in terms of takeaways of advice that you would give to those smaller organizations, and they've got leaders and they want to develop them? What kind of things do you generally advise for them?
Yeah, I think a really powerful thing is peer coaching, or at least just peer getting together and sharing like a problem and trying to solve it together. It might not be like coaching where it's like asking like loads of questions without solving it, but building those frameworks into your organization to give people a space. Like, I know it seems quite simple, but like lunch and learns can be extraordinarily powerful for disseminating knowledge, especially in a small organization. And especially now we're remote, I think it's even more imperative to design your learning, to design your touch points into like ways to integrate knowledge with people, like facilitating and sharing. So with the startups I've been working with, it's actually trying to integrate those elements of facilitation and coaching throughout all the levels in a tiny way, so that it kind of like incrementally helps all the way through, because they don't have either the money to invest in the leadership program at this moment, or they go at such a pace, it would almost be out of date by the time they started. So it would be like pick one thing and just roll it out, like in terms of a concept, and focus on that.
Yeah, it must be a real challenge as well, because obviously these people are entrepreneurs, I suppose. They're not necessarily, they might have a great brain for a product or something like that, or something that they've developed, but then obviously the leadership side might not necessarily, they might not have had that experience, I suppose. So it must be, yeah.
Well, that links back after you.
Sorry, what were you saying, Peter?
I was going to say that links back to what Julia was saying about the very common problem of people having some sort of whether it's a technical specialty or an idea or a product from an entrepreneurial perspective, and suddenly find they're in a situation where they're not trying to deliver everything themselves, or at least they're still trying to deliver everything themselves, but actually it's becoming a complete disaster because they as leaders need to be starting to deliver things through other people. And there's a real shift in mindset that comes from that. And it's a lot more than skills. We talk about leadership as a skill set. It's a mindset, and it's recognizing that shift needs to take place.
Fantastic. So we are coming up close to our hour. So it's about time that we We did our 2 lies and 1 truth reveal. Thank you for all your input so far into the discussion. I absolutely can't believe we've already come up to an hour, but there we go. So we need to go through those. So I think we started, didn't we, Peter, with you really liking cucumbers, from what I remember. But no, tell us your 3 facts, Peter.
So my 3 facts were: I've conducted 4 weddings and a funeral. I'm an award-winning artist at a national level, and I have a bit of a thing for cucumber, and I will find a way to eat it in some form every single day.
Okay, so Ilona, what's your thoughts on those 3? Which is the one that you think is the truth?
The cucumber thing. That's so specific.
The cucumber thing. That was the one I was going to say is definitely a lie. Julia, what's your thoughts on those 3?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel the cucumber must be the lie, but I'm not sure. He's smiling so much when he talks about it, so either he really loves it or he just has to put
Maybe
on
really like
the face. I don't know. I go for the cucumber.
What do you mean when you say?
Because I smile a lot, so that could be very confusing.
You were smiling more. If you watch it back, you smile more when you don't watch it.
What do you mean when you say conducted 4 weddings and a funeral? What do you mean by that?
As in actually led the wedding and the funeral.
Led it.
So
Okay.
actually, stood at the front.
Yeah, stood at the front and did that. I didn't know if you
the wedding ceremony. Yeah.
Okay.
Not as a musical conductor.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to say an award-winning artist. That's going to be what I think the truth is.
The truth is. So, actually, it is the award-winning artist.
Never get these right.
So, when I was 10, I won an art competition. I came first in all of Wales. And the challenge I have is I still draw like a really good 10-year-old now.
Oh, really?
That was my peak. That was as good as it got.
Was there a specific piece that you did? What was the?
I remember doing it was a pastel that I did of a fire ship putting out a fire many years ago in London. So yeah, why I have no idea, but there we are. That was my peak. I drew a brilliant 10-year-old.
Well done. And I can't believe I actually got one right. I normally get them all wrong. So okay. So Ilona, you've met some very, very famous people according to your 3 facts. So remind us who they are.
So I've met Fidel Castro, I've met the Pope, and I've met David Attenborough.
Julia, what's your thoughts?
Oh, I'm lost. The Pope, but I'm just guessing.
The Pope. Okay, the Pope. Peter?
So we had Fidel Castro, the Pope, and what was the other one?
David Attenborough.
David Attenborough. I'm going to go for David Attenborough as the true one.
I am also going to go with David Attenborough, but I know that you've been to Cuba.
Yes.
So I know that because we discussed that, and I'm sure you've probably been to the Vatican as well. I'm going to say David Attenborough.
Okay, so I didn't meet Fidel Castro because he was dead, but I went to his funeral. I didn't meet David Attenborough, but I did meet the Pope, and I shook his hand because I was working at the FCO at the time, and I was part of the team that led his when he visited us, and so I met the Pope legit. He has little Pope shoes and everything.
Wow. And what was the David Attenborough one? What did you say about David Attenborough?
Yeah, no, I haven't met David Attenborough. I want to, very much so. I want to talk to him on my podcast. So,
how did you end up at Fidel Castro's funeral as well?
So I went to Cuba to research the impact of the internet on the country that's the second least internet penetrated country on earth. And while I was there, Fidel Castro passed away. And so I went to the funeral and the ceremony with all the global South leaders, and that's another podcast episode.
All right. Okay. We'll have to tune into the podcast. What's the podcast called again? I've forgotten the name. I do apologize.
Still loading. So still loading leadership.
Still loading. Yeah. So go find that out on your podcast provider. Still loading, and so hopefully lots of stories like that. Julia, what's yours were really quite long. I hope you remember them all because I know 2 of them are lies. So you have to remember and repeat them all.
Yeah, well, and I do have to say, you see now how bad I am at lying, because I turned the game around. I gave you one lie and two truths.
Oh, this happened the last show as well. Everyone gets confused by it. I might have to scrap this to start something else.
I'm really, really sorry. But anyway, so you have to detect the lie, the one lie.
We got to detect one lie. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So number one was that I have a lifeguard license, and I love fish and swimming in the ocean. And number two, yes, number two was that I interviewed the Backstreet Boys, so with a German musician channel. And number three, that I worked as a storyliner for a soap opera called Forbidden Love.
Okay, I think I know what I'm going for. Ilona, which is the lie?
Okay. So I think the soap opera thing is the lie. I definitely think that you have a lifeguard license. I think you're swimming in every single thing you need. And I think the Backstreet Boys, that's just charming.
Yeah, very different to Fidel Castro's funeral. Yeah, Peter, what's your thoughts? Which is the one lie?
Number three as well. That's the lie, I reckon. Okay. The soap writer. I think the last one is true, actually, and I think the lifeguarding one is definitely true. I'm just going off the fact that I know you're in Nice, and yeah, what a place to be. So I'm going to say that the lie is the Backstreet Boys.
Oh, look at that! So I'm not so bad at lying after all. Well, I mean, so let's start at the back. So I did work for the soap opera called Forbidden Love during my studies, and I absolutely loved it. I worked there twice, and it was, I think, one of the most amazing jobs I've ever done. So I totally thrive on that. And wow. Number two is also true. So actually, when I was 18, I went to New York and I interviewed the Backstreet Boys for Viva, which is the German MTV. And I also was just amazing. I got out of school for a couple of days in order to do that. So that was great. And well, I mean, actually, I think I told 2.5 truths. There you go, because I had to make sure I'm going. So I do have a lifeguard license. I do have it. However, I am so scared of fish. So if I go in the ocean, all fish come to me. So I can't use my lifeguard license in the ocean. So it's actually really a problem for me. So usually pool, I could go and rescue you, but not in the ocean. You can't get me. You can't get me in there.
Wow!
That was a niche part of the comment. That was a lie.
Yeah. Pretty much everything.
You have to be, tricky.
Can I just say, though, it just shows we were saying about how important integrity is in leadership. And the point is that you just can't help but tell the truth, Julia. So credit to you.
Yeah, 2.5 truths and a half a lie is the next show's little game that we're playing. 2.5 truths, half a lie.
I think you won that one, Julia. You are the winner.
Yeah, I think you definitely did win. So you started off saying you were terrible, and you won the game. So yeah, I'm not inviting you for poker. But yeah. So thank you very much, guys, for joining us and having this discussion. It's been a real pleasure hosting you, and thank you everyone who tuned in and will tune in the future as well and watch this back or listen to it on a podcast if you are now as well. Our next show is on the 13th of October. I already sort of dropped a little bit that it's around diversity and inclusion. Very, very interesting discussions going on about how we're going to do that show and some of the topics there. So please do join us then. But for now, thank you all and goodbye.